there's no problem, but if possible, we would prefer, in order to have a better debate, to see all the cameras on. Congrats to both teams for performing so well in the tournament and for achieving to the final. And without anything further ado, we will start with the debate. So in order to do that, I have put in my computer one number, which is the in favor, and another number, which is the against. So I'll be asking the captain in the team, Alea y acta est, please to choose either 1 or 2.
I choose 2.
Okay, so the team Alea y acta est choose 2, so they would go against, and the team United We Can Debate would go in favor of the motion.
Do we begin?
No, 1 minute, please. Okay, so now that we've drafted positions, let me allow me to introduce the jury who's going to be judging this final. I'm going to be the chair for the final, and with me there's 2 more judges. First, we have Rebecca Chiacchini. Rebecca is a very experienced debater who has been debating and judging for years. She was one of the champions of this CICAE League a few years ago, along with the other judge who will be joining us, who is Catalina Collison, who was also a champion of the Spanish and English debating league, if I recall correctly. Rebecca is joining us from the United States. Catalina is joining us from Spain. So I'm very thankful to both of them for joining to this marvelous final. And with that said, we will start with the debate. Please, I remember the teams to keep the time that they're of their speeches, although we will also be taking the time. Please mute yourself unless you're speaking. The judges will be doing the same thing. And with that said, good luck to both teams, and let's have a wonderful debate.
Thank you. So I begin now, yes? Sorry, do I begin now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of movement. These are some of our individual freedoms that exist in democratic states. They're all related to those throughout our life. But there's something missing: freedom to decide about life. Is this the future of limited individual freedoms we want, or should we make a change? Good afternoon. My name is Artin, and along with my teammates Jose Gonzalez, Daniel Jones, and Joshua Sadler, we will be defending our stance in favor of the question that has been given today. Should people have the right to freely end their lives? Our group agrees with the statement because it grants freedom to individuals while diminishing suffering. Furthermore, to establish the framework that will be used along the duration of this debate, I would like to clarify the difference between suicide and what we are discussing today. Suicide is attempted by an individual upon oneself, whereas ending a life, while encapsulating the concept, is not limited to it, for the reason that it additionally connects the idea of physical and health complications, as well as euthanasia as another concept. So, to begin with, our 3 arguments developed from our team are as follows. The first one being, people should have the right to freely end their lives because it fulfills our individual freedoms. The second one being, people should have the right to freely end their lives because the moral differences between proposed practices and existing ones are minimal. And the third one being, people should have the right to freely end their lives because it avoids condemning people to unnecessary suffering. Now I'll proceed to construct these 3 arguments, starting with the first. People should have the right to freely end their lives because it fulfills our individual freedoms. As citizens of a democratic state, we are granted individual freedoms that allow us to make decisions in relation to our lives. For example, we have the freedom to believe in any religion, form part of any movement, and speak about any ideas. However, there exists one exception: the freedom to decide when it comes to ending our lives. Therefore, in the last stage of our lives, we lose the ability to decide over something that belongs to no one else but ourselves. This means that we are granted freedoms throughout our existence, but not about our existence. Furthermore, the intention of human rights and individual liberties is that of dignity, and by adding on to the latter, we are thus eliminating a barrier on human dignity that is otherwise in place. As a result, this would fulfill individual freedoms and, hence, human dignity. Now on to our second argument. People should have the right to freely end their lives because the moral differences between proposed practices and existing ones are minimal. Currently, with restrictions in place, doctors have the ability to submit patients to certain treatments, which may ease the suffering. Nevertheless, they, in turn, accelerate one's death. These are practices that occur without any further regulation, and the moral difference between this and euthanasia is practically insignificant, as they both lead to the death of a patient because of what the doctor is administering and occur to avoid suffering regardless when death is already going to happen sooner or later. Therefore, as practices which are morally similar exist and there is consensus on their benefits, others should be implemented because they do not pose a significant difference on such terms, meaning they are ethically acceptable. Finally, I will develop our third argument. People should have the right to freely end their lives because it avoids condemning people to unnecessary suffering. Some situations, such as diseases or physical complications, may cause immense suffering to a person without a possible remedy, often felt by both the individual as well as their families. By not facilitating the option to end their lives, we are condemning them to live a life of pain in which they will feel as if there's no way to escape the suffering. This may also lead to psychological struggles both for the families as well as the individual. For these fundamental reasons, this right should exist, as it avoids condemning people to live through pain unnecessarily, both physically and psychologically. So, to summarize, our thesis on part of our group is that it grants freedom to individuals while diminishing suffering. And our three arguments are that yes, it fulfills our individual freedoms, the moral differences between proposed practices and existing ones are minimal, and it avoids condemning people to unnecessary suffering. Now I would like to proceed to wish the good luck to the opposing team, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that wonderful speech. We now welcome the introduction speech for the team against the motion.
Hello, can you all hear me properly? Okay. He who contemplates suicide should ask himself whether his actions can be consistent with the idea of humanity as an end itself, and not everyone is capable physically and mentally to do so. Good afternoon, judges, opposing team, and fellow mates. I'm Maria Todos, introducer of the team CICAE, formed by Mireia Montaner as our reporter, Benzo Cesar Concluder, Margaston as our captain, and today we're here to debate the question, should people have the right to freely end their lives? My team and I answered this question with a firm no. No, people should not have the right to freely end their lives. Before anything, I would like to pose a question. Why does it have to be freely? There has to be some type of regulations. True, there's the right to live, the right of freedom of choice, and my team and I already acknowledge it. But we do truly believe that having such a responsibility and the power of such things might lead to chaos that at some point should be regulated, mainly when we're talking about the life and wellness of the people. So now I'll proceed to explain our two arguments that are going to be used to defend our position. Our first argument is a social argument, and it is that there are further consequences and can lead to the abuse of right. Having the power to decide over your life and other people's lives can lead into the manipulation and abuse of rights. It can lead into eugenics, not only for poor people, but also for people where the government feels they're just an annoyance. Families might also pressure euthanasia to be used in their relatives, maybe because of inheritance or because of money. There can be a political abuse in a way of pressuring people, especially older generations, to go in such processes so that they don't have to waste so much money on them, on pensions or on supplies for them, as this evidence from a report of the Congressional Budget Office shows all the money they spend on elderly people. Processes that lead into ending someone else's life, if these are not controlled, can get to the point that it might be abuse, leading to homicide. But as it is named after euthanasia or assisted suicide, it would somehow be accepted. My team and I will defend this idea to prevent from any of this to happen. We aren't saying that such things will definitely happen, but we're preventing it from happening. Then our second argument is a medical argument, and it is that there are groups of people who are incapable of taking such important decisions. We believe that people should not have the right to freely end their lives because some groups of people are unable to make such complex decisions and they aren't aware of what they might be choosing. The main consequence does not only imply individuals itself, but also thirds and people surrounding them. The first group we believe are not able to understand complex ideas such as death are children. By implying that everyone has the right to freely end their lives, kids are also added to the pack. But we consider and are going to prove that children haven't developed a lot of capacities and are not mature enough in order to decide and have a critical opinion on whether to continue living or not. It doesn't make sense that the law protects minors when committing serious crimes such as homicide, but on the contrary, let them take decisions on whether to continue living or not. Another group we believe are not able to take these decisions are people whose medical conditions don't let them be conscious of what's happening to their surroundings or even to themselves. And to what extent can we trust the will after it's written? People can still change their opinions and points of view, but because of their conditions, they're able to do such things or say them out loud. So, to sum up, argumentative land is divided into two different arguments. Our first argument is that it can get uncontrolled and a lot of rights can be abused over the victim. And our second argument is about how some groups of individuals are unable because of their maturity, their mental stability, or their medical conditions to make such important decisions surrounding the life and wellness of themselves. This has been my introduction, and I would like to thank the opposing team for being in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
You muted yourself.
Hello, do you hear me? Great, so thank you also the against introduction for a brilliant speech. We now welcome the first bottle in the team for the motion.
Yes, can you properly hear me? I'd like to excuse myself for not using the camera option because I'm using the browser option. Sorry for that. Good morning, my name is Jose Gonzalez and I'm the first rebuttal from the team UWCD who is in favor of the question planted. I'll dedicate the first part of my intervention to refute the other team's argument, while dedicating the second part of it to construct my own. Both their first arguments spoke about how it could be abused, and the second argument spoke about incapability of choice. Well, we say no because possible abuses, which are already going to happen, must not be sufficient for withholding and restricting people's rights. This is because people's rights must be defended, whilst those who commit wrongdoing must be prosecuted. If we do the opposite, we are trying to prosecute with people's rights. Furthermore, if we took into account that it could be acceptable to limit the right to death because of what others may do, it is necessary to bear in mind that illegal euthanasia and assisted suicide already occur without it being regulated. Therefore, limiting people's rights is not effective in preventing abuse, but does subtract from people's individual liberties. As abuse is going to occur, we may as well regulate euthanasia and not limit people's choices, nor harm them or their relatives. Their second argument, well, which spoke about choice, you would be able to choose because euthanasia would be another treatment, meaning it would open up more treatments, which will, after all, expand your capability to choose. Now I'll move on and construct my own argument. Our first argument says it fulfills individual freedoms. Because we are citizens of a democratic state, we're granted individual freedoms that allow us to make decisions in relation to our lives. However, there exists one exception, freedom of decision with regards to ending our lives. Therefore, in the last stage of our lives, we lose the ability to decide over something that belongs to no one but ourselves. This means we are granted freedom throughout our existence, but not about our existence. This can be considered contradictory or incoherent to be able to decide things like the where or with whom we live if we can't decide on the core of what encompasses everything, our life. The invention of human rights and individual liberties is that of dignity. By adding on to the latter, we are thus eliminating a barrier in human dignity that is otherwise in place. This is due to the fact that physical and psychological distress leads to undermining people's dignity. As a result, this would fulfill individual freedoms and hence human dignity. I have an evidence for this, which is the first article of the European Agency for Human Rights. which states that the dignity of the human person is not only a fundamental right in itself, but constitutes the real basis of fundamental rights. Meaning, with these rights, we cannot have the others. This is why dignity is important. Your question, please?
How is someone in a vegetative state supposed to bear the greatest responsibilities of making such an impactful decision?
Well, what we mean is that those people in vegetative states, if we are not sure that what they want to do, well, this treatment cannot be applied because it's something you, yourself, in a conscious state must choose. So if we are not sure, we cannot apply this treatment. Now I'll move on to construct our second argument, which states that the moral difference between proposed practices and existing ones are minimal. Currently, with restrictions in place, doctor can submit patients to certain treatments, such as palliative care, which may reduce the suffering. However, these accelerate one's death. These are practices that occur without any further regulation, and the moral difference between these and euthanasia is practically insignificant, as they both lead to the death of the patient because of what the doctor is administering, and occur to avoid suffering when death is already going to happen sooner than later. Therefore, as practices which are morally similar exist, and there is consensus on their benefits, others should be implemented because they do not pose a difference on such terms, meaning they are ethically acceptable. A study on pain relief with a possible shortening of life, out of which, with the intent of shortening it in Holland, carried out by the investigators J. Vega and I. Ortega, showed that between 4,800 to 2,800 deaths a year caused through pain relief with the intent of shortening the life between 1990 and 2001 in Holland. This means that palliative care is already being used with the second intention of shortening life. So why don't we directly do this? And I'll quickly name my argument 3 due to time restrictions, which states that we are condemning people to unnecessary suffering. Well, there are some diseases or physical complications which may cause immense suffering to a person without a possible remedy, often felt by both individuals as their families. These are called terminal illnesses. If we don't facilitate the option to end their lives, we are condemning them to a life of pain, in which they will feel as there is no way to end their suffering, which is bad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the first rebuttal in the team in favor of the motion. Please mute yourself now, if possible. We now welcome the first rebuttal in the team against the motion.
Can you hear me? Yes? Should I start?
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Mireia Montana and I'm the first rebutter of the team who stands totally against the proposed question. First, I'll proceed rebutting the arguments of the opposing team and later I'll develop our own arguments. But first, I would like to say a thing. There is no legal right as the right to death. The right we have is the right to life. Governments should always protect the life of people. The moment we understand that we have the right to death, there is a slim line between homicide and assisted suicide. Your first argument is the right to freedom. The main pillar of all rights is the right to life. If we do not protect this right, every other right falls down. What sense does it make to have many rights if we do not protect the main one? Your second argument is the moral differences. I would like to clarify that we do not oppose euthanasia or assisted suicide. We oppose the idea of it being freely. Why should everyone have this right? Why do not regulate the practice to avoid the negative consequences of such? There is a difference between palliative care and euthanasia. Euthanasia kills people, while palliative care relieves pain. You should always keep that in mind. And your third argument is that it avoids condemning people to live a life of suffering. Condemning to live a life of pain is not true. Palliative care is an alternative to euthanasia. The difference is that palliative care doesn't eliminate the other. It is crucial that we understand the fact that once a person is dead, there is no coming back. You said euthanasia exists and it is abused, and if it is abused, we should legalize it. Then let's legalize homicide. Applying the same idea, people are going to be murdered, so let's legalize murder. Now I'll proceed developing our own arguments. Our first argument is the social argument. Assisted suicide and euthanasia discourages investments in palliative care. The World Health Organization states that palliative care affirms life and regards dying as a normal process. It neither hastens nor postpones death. In Netherlands, we see how euthanasia and palliative care are mutually exclusive. Where there is good access to palliative care, there is no need for assisted dying. Discouraging investments in such care has mainly two negative consequences. One, it normalizes deaths and makes it the only solution as the alternative is not good enough. And second, it makes palliative care a luxury that only rich people have access to. Meaning, if you're rich, you get to live. If you are poor, you get to die, which may lead to eugenics. If dying is a free right, vulnerable people will be put under pressure to end their lives. It would be difficult and possibly impossible to stop people from using persuasion or coercion to get people to request euthanasia when they don't really want it. People who are ill and dependent can often feel worthless and an undue burden on those who love and care for them. The last few months of a patient's life are often the most expensive. Shortening the period through euthanasia could be seen as a way of relieving pressure on scarce medical resources or family finances. This leads to another consequence, the worsening of doctor-patient relationship. How can I trust the doctor will strive for my life if my relatives push in the opposite direction? Is there a margin left for the sick, elderly, or disabled to continue to maintain that full trust in those who, until now, had sacred obligation to seek healing for their illness? The empirical slippery slope cannot be ignored. When one looks at the fact across the world, indeed, the legalization of suicide in Switzerland also highlights the expansionary escalation, since it is initially established for a specific and exceptional situation. In 2006, its legal acceptance began only for incurable or fatal illnesses in the short term. In 2007, it was extended to people with psychiatric illnesses. In 2013, the extension was to cases of healthy people who do not suffer from terminal illnesses. What limit do we have? We must always keep in mind that we are decriminalizing homicide. We are attempting to deal with the problems of human beings by killing them. We shall remember that the basis and foundation of our society relies on the trust and security. Decriminalizing homicide makes the citizens feel unsafe. We can start to notice these problems in countries where it is legalized. The first, it was known from a report in the Canadian Medical Association journal that 120 Belgian nurses out of 248 admitted to having performed euthanasia without the patient's request. And according to the official Dutch statistical data of 2012, 7% of Dutch euthanasia cases are carried out without the patient's request. In the end, the negative consequences outweigh the positive. Are we really prepared to accept a right which leads to homicides without penalization? Having explained our social argument, I'll proceed developing our medical one. It is not guaranteed that assisted dying is not administered to patients who, as a result of depression or other reasons, have a reduced decision-making capacity. Is it possible to establish whether their request is enduring, involuntary, or in the free will? The answer is no. One example is minors. Minors are developing as persons, learning to control their feelings and to understand the consequences of the acts and decisions, but they often have irrational behavior. They are also easily manipulated and may be pressured into making a specific decision. In conclusion, minors shouldn't have the opportunity to decide such an important fact, as they may decide irrationally. And another example is people with depression or any other mental disorder, which I proceed to develop in my second rebuttal turn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that piece, Mira. Now we are going to welcome the following rebuttal, which would be the second rebuttal in the team in favor of the motion.
Okay, can you hear me properly? Hello, my name is Daniel Jones, and I'll be presenting my team's second rebuttal by first rebutting the other team's arguments and then counter-arguing their rebuttals. So, first of all, with regards to their arguments, the first argument mentioned abuse and how abuse can occur and irregular practices can occur with relation to euthanasia. However, this is not sufficient for restricting people's rights. This is because we are trying to prosecute wrongdoing from other people with people's rights. But even if it were sufficient, illegal euthanasia already happens when euthanasia is illegal and already happens in places where euthanasia is illegal. So we can see that making euthanasia illegal does not prevent euthanasia from occurring. So what is happening if we do not make euthanasia legal, and if it remains illegal, is that we are not preventing illegal euthanasia and legal practices and irregularities, but we are limiting people's choices. On the other hand, euthanasia to take place, if we allow people the freedom to decide to end their suffering, what is going to happen is, yes, some irregularities may occur, but that also happens when it is illegal. However, we are granting some people the choice to have the capacity to decide to end their suffering. Their second argument mentioned a medical argument and how some people are unable to choose because they are not in the correct circumstances. So in these circumstances, what happens? First of all, in most cases, people are conscious so as to decide this. But if we say that they are in a vegetative state, as the other team have mentioned, then we could cite examples such as that of Ramon Sampedro, the famous case, who asked for euthanasia, and this person was perfectly conscious. He was simply quadriplegic, and we can see how, in most cases, people are conscious. But even if they weren't, they can use previous will of a person which has stated a previous will of what they would like to happen if they were in that circumstance. Yes, your question?
So what do you think about the case of Theo Butler, which was one of the first promoters of euthanasia in the Netherlands, that after analyzing more than 3,000 cases had ratified his opinion that because of legalizing this would decrease the numbers?
Would decrease the numbers of what, sir?
So it would decrease the numbers of increase the numbers of people dying and committing suicide.
Well, what I would say to this is that, in fact, what has been demonstrated is that numbers do not increase throughout. As what is happening is that, for example, in the landslide stated that in 2012, the landslide stated that in 2010 in Holland, only 2.8% of deaths were related to euthanasia, and they said all deaths were the result of euthanasia. This rate is comparable with those in 2001 and 1995 when euthanasia was legalized. So this evidence shows how in Holland, in a 10 years period, the rates of euthanasia has not increased, and therefore I don't know what else to reply to that. With regards to our arguments and what the other team has mentioned to our arguments, first of all, our argument mentions that this will fulfill people's freedom and will fulfill individual freedoms. So what the other team said, that the right to life is the pillar of all freedoms. However, as my teammate said, the human rights, the European Agency for Human Rights stated that the dignity of the person, of the human person, is not a fundamental right in itself, but constitutes the real basis of fundamental rights. So even the right to life is based on dignity. All rights are based on dignity. So the true pillar of all of them is dignity, and this contributes to a dignified death, which therefore contributes to the pillar of human rights. Our second argument mentioned that there is not a moral difference, and my teammate backed this with evidence, and to which you said that they both are homicide. But however, one of them is euthanasia and assisted suicide are to end suffering at will, whilst homicide is not to end life. It is just to end a life just because, and that has no different parameters. It is simply to end a life, not to end a life of pain and suffering, which can't be, may be considered. Argument talked about suffering, as I have been mentioning. People are suffering, and this would allow people to end this suffering and end their pain, as well as their family suffering and pain because of seeing them in that state. And they mentioned that there are other alternatives for palliative care. Again, I must say, in many instances, this is not applicable, and I'm going to state again the famous case of Ramon Sampedro, who was quadriplegic. If you give Ramon Sampedro palliative care, nothing will occur because it cannot be related with some instances. So you've also mentioned in a vegetative state. So I must say that with a previous will, this can be satisfied. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that speech to the speaker who just spoke. We now welcome the second rebuttal of the team against the motion.
Can you hear me? Okay, should I start? Hello, my name is Mireia Montana, and I'm the second rebuttal of the team who stands totally against the proposed question. First, I'll proceed by rebutting the arguments of the opposing team and later developing our own. Our first argument is the social argument, which is the consequences of the application. You said that abuse is not enough. It is sufficient because killing only one person is enough to make regulations. And yes, we want to avoid suffering, but not killing people. And then our second medical argument is the incapacity of some people in choosing. It is not only vegetative state, it is also depression, bipolarity, or other mental illness that makes people have a less decision-making capacity. And I would like to say that we want regulations. Like, the main problem here is that you do not want regulations for people who cannot make decisions in a well state. Now I'll proceed rebutting your first argument, which is the right to freedom. So the opposing team developed an argument as an extension of freedom of choice. First of all, I would like to clarify something. We are entitled to our own personal preferences and choices, but only if they do not betray the human rights of others. We are not entitled to being more worthy of our human value than other human beings. According to a study developed by 9 professionals of the field, suicide is contagious. Having a member of a family or a friend committing suicide has terrible psychological consequences. This is a clear state where we should not be entitled to our personal preferences. We shouldn't have this choice unless if this choice has a negative effect on the family. We are betraying the mental health of people who surround us. And then the violation of the right of freedom of choice, I would like to ask a question. Are people with mental illness with incapacity and the incapacity to reason free? Are people who die from an overdose free? Well, the answer is simple. No, they are not free. They do not understand the consequences of their acts and decisions. They have a block obstructing their reasoning. Governments should, by all means, protect them from this block and invest in their cures. The right to freedom of choice loses complete value when we are not free. For example, minors are not free. That's why they are protected by the law. And then you said something about the dignified death. The opposition has said that having the right may mean having a dignified death or a dignified life. First, the concept of dignity is subjective and often misinterpreted. It falls back into the self-moral rules, which are different from each subject. Second, the word dignity is derived from the Latin dignitas, meaning worthiness and nobility. Death cannot be dignified. Death is the negation of all values. Whether it is a dignified means of dying is completely subjective to both the one committing the act and those observing or knowing about it, leading us to come to the conclusion that it may not be a valid basis for their argument. Now, I'll end by developing our own arguments. Regarding our medical one, people with depression or any other mental disorder, these diseases incapacitate the ability of people to make an informed and rational decision. According to the World Health Organization, 3 out of 4 terminally ill people have depression. The problem arises when we think we give these people the option to decide freely, but the people are not free. They do not control their feelings. Studies have shown that antidepressant therapy can take up to 4 months to fully work, and it has an efficiency of about 87%. Assisted dying without any regulation means that these people don't have the time to cure themselves from depression, and therefore we choose the option without fully understanding the consequences. We must apply the same norm to other mental disorders. The final question I propose to you is, are you prepared to possibly euthanize people who in their rational mind wouldn't want to die? Regarding the same argument, if euthanasia were legalized, might we not regard certain individuals as unworthy of life? In Germany, before the Holocaust, physicians were the ones who selected patients and carried out this practice. To those who say it cannot happen here, we reply, imagine the easy relationship between respect for autonomy and the need of greater cost containment. The patient's care is disproportionately expensive. What begins for the patient's own wishes may later be endorsed for economic reasons. If euthanasia and assisted suicide were really legalized, individuals themselves might believe that society does not want them to live. In this profit-driven economic climate, it is realistic to expect that insurers are going to do the right thing or the cheap thing. If insurers deny or even delay approval of costlier life-saving alternatives, the money saving but fatal measure become the deadly default. The truth is that assisted suicide as a public policy is rife with dangerous loopholes and consequences, especially for the vulnerable in our society. I would like to end my turn quoting the famous philosopher Pete Singer, who said, "Of all the arguments against voluntary euthanasia, the most influential is the slippery slope. Once we allow doctors to kill patients, we will not be able to limit the killing to those who do not want to die." Thank you very much. I have 4 minutes 57 seconds.
Thank you very much. Well, please mute yourself. Thank you. So that was all for the rebuttals. Now we welcome the concluding speech for the team against the motion to conclude the debate on side opposition in this final. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dental Chair, and I'm the concluder for the team UCJC, which finds itself against the giving the right to people to freely end their lives. Now, throughout making reference to the quote we provided by Immanuel Kant in the introduction, throughout this debate, we have proven the point which he made on certain people not being able to make such a decision on their own. We as a whole should not force onto them responsibilities too heavy for them to handle, and I'll explain how we accomplish this in the following. Now, our rebuttal has effectively mentioned the abuse of rights as an argument, and the opponent tried to refute it by saying that abuse of rights will always happen, but they must be given anyway. Whereas our rebuttal stated that just the killing of one person, so abuse of one person's right, should encourage regulation, just as with the abuse of any other right. Now, we also effectively stated that groups are not capable of taking such important decisions, and these groups mainly meaning people who are not mature enough or people not in the physical or psychological conditions to do so. And we emphasize this point throughout the whole debate. We even made a question to the opposing team on whether they believe that people in a vegetative state should be able to should be able to carry the responsibility of saying yes or no in this situation, and they answered that no, those type of people would not be able to. This is already a regulation. Setting that is a regulation. Them having to write a will, as they stated that with a will they would be able to go through euthanasia. Stating that only with a will they would be able to go through that is already a regulation, and this is what we are arguing for, and this is what they are arguing against. So they were in favor of our point and against their point. Now, our rebuttal also provided factual and quantitative data valid to our point, whereas the opposing team has not provided any evidence and tended to depend mainly on just one of their arguments, that of individual rights and freedoms. Our rebuttal stated that the right to life is the pillar and must be protected, and she effectively argued on why this is. Now, our rebuttal also stated that palliative care is an alternative to euthanasia. It reduces pain instead of just ending one's life and eliminating them from existence. What we strive for is attempting to make this palliative care work for everything, instead of just eliminating people. Instead of just killing people to eliminate other people's problems. Now, with that in mind, I would like to pose a question. Should we be providing solutions to problems such as suffering and depression, or should we be working to avoid those problems in the first place through measures and through making palliative care work for every single disease and problem that mankind has? Thank you to everyone who participated in this debate, and good luck.
Thank you very much for that concluding speech to the team against. We now welcome the concluding speech in the team in favor of the motion, which will also be the last speech of this tournament in English. So thank you very much, and you have the floor.
Thank you. I would just like to check you can hear me. Should people have the right to freely end their lives? Good day. My name is Joshua Sadler, and today, alongside my team, I'll be concluding this debate defending the presented question. To begin with, I would like to talk upon some of the most relevant aspects in this debate, including my team and the opposing team. The opposing team, on various occasions, created incorrect comparisons, such as euthanasia and homicide. Second of all, they left unanswered both of our presented questions and did not even address them. Third of all, we provided solid evidence in various cases, such as the non-increase of deaths in the Holland example, yet the concluder of the opposing team did not address this. Furthermore, I would like to speak about both of their arguments. Their first argument is the social one, which would lead to consequences and abuses. Their second argument is the medical one, and the incapability of choice. My team stated and rebuted both of these arguments as follows. Their first argument, we rebuted, saying that the abuses do not overclaim our rights. Human rights prevail above all. And abuses already occur, as our team had stated various times before with our evidences. And we would only reduce our individual rights, which is something no human wants. Second of all, their second argument, their medical one, we say, our team says that euthanasia creates options for patients. On top of this, in most cases, patients are are conscious, such as the case of Ramon San Pedro, who was able to decide upon his election. Furthermore, there are other ways of deciding if someone is in a vegetational state, such as their will or their family. Moving on, our arguments are as follows. Yes, because it fulfills our individual freedoms. We are citizens of a democratic state. We must fulfill our rights, and we must also fulfill our dignity. They contradicted this by saying that there is no right to death and the right to life prevails. But we could obviously see that the right of dignity prevails overall. Our second argument is yes, because the moral difference between proposed practices and existing ones are minimal. Palliative care reduces suffering, though leads to death. Euthanasia is ethically accepted, thus it is not implemented, though it is not implementing, thus it should be. Third argument it says yes, because it is condemning people to unnecessary suffering. No human should suffer, and no life should be lived in pain. They answered this by saying that death is a one-time thing, yet euthanasia removes everyone's suffering, family, patient, and their surrounding. To end off, I would like to cite our exordium. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, liver disease, pulmonary disease, cancer, heart disease. These illnesses lead to great amounts of suffering for the patient and families, who are forced to suffer for the rest of their lives, many of them being untreatable via palliative care. Is this the future we want, or should we make a change? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for both teams for what was a great and wonderful debate and a great final for this tournament. We will now proceed to the announcement of the people who are going to qualify for the final in Spanish. We will then have the final in Spanish, and after all, we will begin the closing ceremony, including the announcement of the results of both finals and the best speakers. I encourage the speakers of this final to stay connected, but without their cameras, so that the final can occur, the Spanish final. Good luck to both teams. It was really a brilliant debate. Thank you very much. Thank you. Without further ado, I leave the floor to Javier,